Oh, we are on air. Hey, yep. We are. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Dan here with,
Steven Shinder.
and
We both have the same last name because we're father and son.
that's right. I'm the dad, in case you couldn't tell. I know I look so young, right? And speaking of young and young at heart, we're celebrating a very special person's birthday, Steve Howe, the guitarist for Yes, one of a few, but the longest standing and most legendary, with all due respect, and one of the most legendary guitar players ever of any genre of music. Happy 77th.
Yeah, like each Yes guitarist I consider legendary, but I think if you're
Yeah,
talking like in the prog rock sphere, Steve Howe has had a lot of contributions there, like with Asia as well, and um, you could even throw in. Well, I guess GTR like has some of that '80s sound in it, so
sure.
But yeah, quite a lot of contributions. So on this episode, we decided to talk about a couple of things, and pardon us if we go like all over the place. There's just like some really interesting stuff, but we're talking about Steve Howe's autobiography, All My Yesterdays, as well as what we think of the Tomorrow release, Permanent Dream, which came out almost a year ago, and it was a 2023 remaster of Tomorrow's self-titled album from 1968. So, um, did you want to start with that first question we have there on our
Yeah.
doc?
And the autobiography, yeah, which is just wonderful. So I'll ask you first, what was your biggest overall takeaway? And did you read it and listen to the audio? I only listened to the audible version just for
Right.
the sake of time.
I read the ebook version about 2 years ago, and in preparation for this, I kind of flipped through it again. But I also listened to this 1 hour preview of the book that I think it's from Google Play or something. It's um
Mm,
so um and yeah, I don't. So that's my experience with it. And like you said, you've only listened to the audiobook version narrated by Simon Vance. Um,
and we'll get to Simon. But in the meantime, what's your biggest overall takeaway from this autobiography?
so I think my biggest takeaway is that, despite how the relationships with various people are, like with Steve Howe and like other people, he's still willing to give them credit where credit is due in terms of their contributions to music and all the work that they put in. And so I think that's really important because it shows that there's not like he doesn't like sugarcoat things, but he does give credit where credit is due, if that makes sense.
I don't know if he knows where the sugar is, but and what I mean is that, and that does make sense because my biggest takeaway is similar, and that is that this there's a lot of truths in here that some people may be surprised by. Um, but as Steve said, uh, Steve Howe does give credit where credit's due, and all of this. But there were some conflicting personal issues with certain people and certain behaviors, and I was a little surprised that it was that transparent and revealing, and I don't take issue with it. It almost really kind of made the read, or in my case listen, more real and more, I'm grateful that he was that honest about things. But that's one of probably my biggest one, is just how much truth was in it that even hardcore fans would probably be unaware of, because it's stuff that, to my knowledge, has not been published elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, like there are some things that people might be like, "Whoa, that happened," but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it does give it a more balanced view, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and so Simon, I'm sorry, what's his last name? The narrator.
Simon Vance.
Yeah, Simon Vance. I thought he did a great job. And, for the first little while, I was a little disappointed because I would want to hear it in Steve's voice. I love listening to autobiographies in the author's voice. But I also understand, I think you and I talked about this a few days ago, different reasons why people might not do it. The sake of time. They just don't want to sit and record. They're not good at reading out loud. I'm not. Bringing back all the flood of emotions and stuff. I mean, when you write something like this, and as you know, I've written something that won't come out for a while, but I don't know if I'd want to read it out loud. I might have someone else there. I don't know. But so I can kind of relate to that. You just poured your life out for however long it took to write his book, and then to sit and read it. It's like, I get that, So then I started to become very fond of Simon's voice, because the more I thought about it, the more he had a similar cadence to Steve Howe's voice. It's not like if you got me to read it bouncing off the walls and bleh, it just wouldn't make sense. And a voiceover artist like that, but Simon just kind of plugged in with a similar demeanor and voice cadence, and I liked it. If it was someone with a Southern Georgia accent from America, it wouldn't make sense. If it was someone with a heavy Australian accent, it wouldn't make sense. So I think it's a really great choice. I'm not familiar with any other work. He might be a very famous actor or voiceover artist for all I know. I'm unaware. How about you?
Yeah, from the preview I listened to, I really enjoyed how he was reading it. I don't think I was comparing it to how Steve sounds. So I'd be curious if maybe that varies from person to person, but I think he did a good job like reading it clearly, and I can see why he gets like audio book work. Like he's really good at narrating this stuff.
Cool. Do
Yeah,
you know
so
if he's done other audiobook work?
yeah, but don't ask me what titles, I don't know.
Okay. Nice preempt.
Right. And so the structure of his I keep wanting to say autobiography is it pretty much goes up to mid 2017, and then it came out in 2020. And it actually begins with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame stuff. And I think that's pretty smart to begin with that, because it's something that we've been taught in writing classes, back when I was in college, especially in journalism. Like you gotta begin with a scene that's really gripping and hook people in, and then you can go back in time and start from the beginning. So I think the sort of chaoticness of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame stuff was an interesting place to start before you go way back in time from when he was really young. Because, like, I'm not sure how it would have played off if he had just started like right from the beginning.
No, I agree. It's also something that I learned in professional public speaking. The same thing. You don't just
Yeah.
walk on stage and say, "Hi, thank you. I want to thank Kathy, the event plan." You got to grip them right from the beginning. The interesting thing about the choice of that is the two elements. One, they finally got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like that's a big moment for the legacy of the band, right? To finally get in. But then the backstory, the behind the curtain story, and the follies and the antics and the all the displeasure of some stuff and different things, and Tony not being, all those things just added that much more to that element of starting with that, right?
Yeah. And some of the stuff we kind of already knew beforehand. Like the order in which people spoke should have been different, and maybe there would have been a better outcome.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it was a huge moment for the band, but also like a really belated moment. Like ideally they would have been inducted in like the mid 90s or something, and so maybe everyone could have been there. But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And I feel like between this and Getty Lee's book, My Effin' Life, as well as what Billy has said about like that time. We kind of get a good overview of what that event was like, these different perspectives.
Yeah, it rounds out the what our perceived reality of it, rather than just hearing one version of it. You know.
Right. And Steve does talk a bit about his childhood. I think he even mentions playing with toy soldiers, if I remember correctly. And
Yeah.
so, we've talked before. That's something that me and my brother Alex have, your other son, have
Oh yeah.
played with when we were little kids. And it's just kind of funny, like imagining Steve Howe, like being that young and playing
But
those
it
sorts of games
is,
as
but
well.
I have to throw a couple things in. And hi, guys, we'll get to comments in a moment. Feel free to chime in, folks, if you've read the book or if you have a Steve House story, go ahead and pop it in there. But the way you played with the little toy soldiers was different from anyone else, and that was using them to act out the entire movie of Monty Python, the Holy Grail.
Oh yeah, there's
And
even a Monty Python mention in this book, funny enough.
yeah, yeah, and that was neat a couple times. Um, so yeah, just a quick shout out, a couple people chiming in. John Papalardo, who actually lives about 12 minutes from me, says, "Hi guys, hey John, thanks for chiming in." Larry Elbertson, a longtime Jump Talk TV fan and Yes Shift fan. Hi guys, it's lunch break. Just wanted to pop in and say hi. Thank you. So why are we also simulcasting this on Jump Talk TV? Well, we do most, if not all, our episodes on Yes Shift simulcasted over to Drum Talk TV because one, we're both a big part of Drum Talk TV, but the other is in this specific case, Steve Howe is a huge influence on me musically. Um, in so many ways, not just as a guitar player playing guitar and other stringed instruments, which I just love stringed instruments. I've never studied them very deeply, but I have a few. And I like him. I also love older instruments. I love the instruments of the Renaissance period and of different cultures and whatnot. And being the co-creator and creator himself of so much great music that I love personally and love playing too throughout the Yes catalog, his solo career, especially the first two albums for me, and also Asia. It makes sense, at least to me, and hopefully it will to others, that we're simulcasting this on Drum Talk TV. You know, the same way that like when it's Rick Wakeman or Keith Emerson's birthdays, I do a drum thing on Drum Talk TV and play to some of their songs and stuff. So I just wanted to kind of, in case people are watching going, what? You know, that just don't know. So there you go.
Right. And also like his lyrical
Oh
contributions. He
yeah.
definitely contributed to some of the Yes lyrics, and it can't be understated,
Yeah. Um, yeah, his pre-Yes stuff, you know, you mentioned as a little kid and then getting into, you know, a young man. It's like, wow, some of that stuff, like the way he acquired his most cherished guitars, the S-175, and started playing with other people, you know, the way that unfolded uh, was really cool. But I have to say, as a lover of instruments, and I'll tell a little story I told Enja, that's my wife, for those who don't know, the other night when we were listening to part of the book together. I love how Steve Howe really goes into he's a detail guy, you know, he's
Yeah.
real meticulous. I love how he goes into the gear because I love instruments, not just drums, but I love instruments. And with guitars and stuff, I'm actually very knowledgeable about guitars and amps, not just because of a personal interest, but when I was like 16, 17, 18, around there throughout the period, I worked at the music store that I grew up buying from and where I first took lessons when I was like just before 7 years old. It's called Kay's Music Scene, and it was founded and owned by Sidney Kay, who happened to be, amongst others, Danny Kay's drummer. No relation, though. And when I worked there as a teenager, one of my jobs was to, one at a time, take every stringed instrument off the wall, take it into the luthier's booth, polish it, put oil on the rosewood or whatever kind of fretboard it was, change the strings if it had been demoed a lot, and do set the intonation with an oscilloscope. I mean, I was like really into it. It really helped me fall in love with the craftsmanship that goes into these instruments. So when he's talking about how he changed this with that, and or got this cherished thing, or got this one for that tone, all these little things, I really dig that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And so he does go into the pre-Yes band days, the bands he was in prior to Yes.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned, one of them was Tomorrow. And so that kind of brings us to this Tomorrow album.
Yeah,
And the
and before
rematch.
we do that, I do want to just mention that I learned more about Bodas and Tomorrow from his book than I'd ever
Oh,
heard
yeah.
or read in any other music magazine or for interviews or anything. It was pretty rich with some early history about his whole career
Yeah.
and
In
just the
Crowd,
music business.
Syndicates. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you want to talk about Tamara?
Yeah, so we're talking about yesterday's and tomorrow, basically.
Right.
Um, so yeah, this Tomorrow album, well, their self-titled album was recorded in 67, released in 68. And for this remaster from last year, it has a different cover. The cover is actually kind of big generator-esque
Yeah, like what's
version.
with that? We've mentioned that before, I think when it first came out, but and I'm sorry folks, the thing that we're using, the platform we're using won't let me size this so it fits all the way in. We got to figure that out. I just can't make it smaller. Um but yeah, the cover was quite surprising to me. I mean, the stretched out letters, that font and just the colors alone.
Yeah, the
Interesting.
pink and yellow, yeah.
Yeah.
And so for this remaster, it looks like a few songs were swapped out. I think Colonel Brown, Shy Boy, and Auntie Mary's Dress Shop, I believe. And I read somewhere that Steve said that those were kind of filler songs. And so for the songs that are included on this particular remaster, he basically did some like refining and making things in tune. I think a couple tracks are shorter. One of them had narration at the beginning previously, and I can kind of see why that would be cut out just to get straight to the point. And I think the live tracks on this might be on the physical release. I'm not sure if they're like on streaming, but yeah, what do you think of the style of this music that he used post production to sort of like refine it a bit for today?
I think, as in some cases, or in some cases, when you modernize something, it does exactly that, and it loses its time capsule-ness, which I love. If something was recorded on a 4-track machine with dusty tape and it's scratchy, but that music made it to vinyl and made it to the radio, I say leave it like that. This did not lose any of that. Like, I had it playing on my phone for a bit, and I went out in the other room and I told my wife, I said, Angie, don't let me eat the brown acid. And she's like, what? And I just held this up. I said, the music is like taking me, just no matter how much I ask for it, don't let me eat it. It really threw me back. And I don't listen to music from way back then often at all. And if I do, believe it or not, folks, it's not the Beatles. It's not Jefferson Airplane. It's either really old Pink Floyd or really old Jethro Tull. And this reminded me of that era and why I do like to listen to that from time to time. And in fact, that first, or not the first song, but My White Bicycle did remind me of that song, the Pink Floyd song called, it's a Syd Barrett era. Well, do you know the name of the song I'm thinking of? It has bicycle in the title.
Oh,
Steve will look it up while I continue, but the album, in today's music that is flooded with so much of, quote, today's music.
okay, it's just called Bike.
Okay, yeah, that's right. It kind of reminded me of that, not as if it was emulating it, but just that same theme, the sound. It was cool because in today's world, we get flooded with so much of today's music that to hear a time capsule release like this from back then was very refreshing. And if we really listen, you know, we should be aware when we listen to music, especially as musicians, it you can hear where other music you're fond of came from. And of course, you know, automatically, I think like most people, I'm sure like you, Steve, I listened to it going, okay, where are influences in Yes in Asia and his solo stuff that I can hear the early seeds of? And honestly, at first there weren't a lot to my ears because maybe I was looking for specific things.
Hmm.
But what I did like, my two favorite songs are Why and Revolution. Revolution, I think, might be the most progressive song on the album, to my ears, anyways. More parts, changes, instruments, you know, things like that. And Why I just liked the groove of it and his soloing and you know all that stuff is when I kind of heard like, okay, I can hear some Fender type instruments there, a bit of runs like in parallels, and you know some little things come through. But well, how about you? Did you
Yeah.
listen to it with those ears as well, trying to pick out early Steve Howe recognizable things that were brought forward in time?
Yeah. What's funny is you mentioned Why, and that's a cover of a Birds song.
Oh,
And
really? I didn't even know because I don't really listen to bands of that era.
yeah. And what's funny is I think Yes also covered a Birds song. I think it might have been I See You. So
I
right there
believe
you
that's correct.
so right there you see that Yes members, even when they weren't performing together quite yet, still had some of the same influences. And Steve mentions in his book that the Tomorrow song Revolution may have influenced the Beatles song of the same name.
Yeah,
He even mentions like recording in Abbey Road Studios, and Paul and Ringo would pop in sometimes.
that's right.
And so when listening,
Imagine that. Wait, back up a minute. Imagine that for a moment. You're a young
imagine
musician.
all the people.
Yeah. In Can you imagine? You're a
Yeah.
young musician, one of your first bands that actually gets a deal. And even back then, the legacy of the Beatles is like, you know, bright and shiny. And here they are popping in. Like, that's just crazy.
Yeah. And what was I gonna say? My favorite song on this is My White Bicycle.
Ah,
And when listening to this album, I could definitely hear, you know, whether the influences were there or not. It felt to me like that psychedelic slash classic 60s rock era. So I was
yeah.
thinking of bands like the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, and I also heard traces of maybe a similar style to what would end up on Yes's cover of America. And Steve
Ah,
even mentions in his book that in 1992 he got to meet Paul Simon, and Paul Simon said that he likes the Yes version of America. So
yeah,
that must have been
complimented
really
him on his
gratifying.
guitar work. Yeah.
Yeah.
All that
So
extended stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so those were some of the influences and similarities that I kind of picked on, picked up on when listening to this album. And I think it, like you said, it is a really good time capsule of that era. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, I don't think there was too much changing of some of the stuff, you know, like the track list was changed a bit, and I mentioned like the other stuff earlier, but I think it summarizes the band really well. And of course, that band also consisted of Keith West on vocals, Junior Wood on bass, John Alder on drums. And from what I've read, the surviving members of Tomorrow, like this had their stamp of approval.
Mm,
So, which is really cool. And yeah, I think it's a nice release to like have out there. I know last year, like, we kind of I think we were thinking of talking about this, but there were like other things we had scheduled for the show that had priority, you know, people we were having on and some anniversaries and stuff. So, but I think it's cool that we were able to give that release its due now, almost a year later. So,
yeah.
is there anything else you want to say about that album before we talk a bit more?
Oh, Only that I again loved the preservation of the sound of the era, and it was really enjoyable to hear that such an early Steve Howe, and then thinking of all the music along the way up until now. It's interesting to hear those roots and enjoy them. I like.
Yeah. Do you think it might have been more popular? Do you think Tomorrow might have been more popular if they'd released their album a couple years earlier? Because when I was listening to it, I was thinking to myself, I can't imagine these songs being on the radio and not being a big hit,
So when you say a
back
couple,
then in the mid 60s.
oh, so I thought you meant this latest re-release of
Oh,
it.
no, I mean, when
Oh,
their
yeah, I was
album
thinking like, what
originally,
difference would that make?
like in the mid 60s as opposed to the late 60s. Is
I
what I'm saying.
do. I think and I don't know if that was possible, but had that music come out in the mid 60s, like 65-ish, 66. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of time difference, people, but pop music and rock and all that really did evolve a lot between 1960 and 1969. Is like there's several generations of musical evolution during that time. So it's a fair question when you put it that way. Back then, yeah, I'd say maybe, but yet I don't want that to minimize the impact it did have when it did come out, you
Mhm.
know, if that makes sense. But what do you think? Are you asking because you believe had it come out a little earlier, it may have been more successful? It may have fit in with
Yeah.
what was happening then?
Yeah, I think so. And I think even members of the band have said as much. So I can see where they're coming
Mm.
from. Um,
And I don't
so
think it means they were late to the party, like, they put something that's outdated because it came out 2 years later. I don't think that.
right. Yeah, like it's definitely great that they were able to make this stuff. And I'm glad that it got another day in the spotlight with the recent re-release. I see we got a comment from Adam Parrish who says, "Hey guys, I bought Steve's book when it came out and really enjoyed it. Something to read during lockdown." Yeah, it came out during lockdown. I think that might have also been when Steve Hackett's book, Genesis on My Bed, came out.
Mm. Now, embarrassingly, I don't have the hard copy. Is it full of a lot of photos and stuff?
Yeah, there are some photos. I do remember one of them showed Steve Howe with some Muppets, which is kind of funny. So
That sounds
um,
familiar. What was that
yeah,
occasion? Was he on
and that
Sesame
was in
Street?
the ebook version. So it's in there, and it's got to be in like the physical copy as well, I imagine.
But what was the occasion? Was he on Sesame Street or something?
I think he might have been like I'd have to like look for it and find it, but um, I have to like swipe through a
While you
lot of.
do that, I want to mention one other thing that was interesting. There was a lot of stuff I never knew or heard. And one of the things was when he mentioned sitting at the table with Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and David Gilmour for that party that was thrown for, I think, one of the Fender guitar creators or something. Do you remember that part, Steve?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, that was neat. Just him sharing some special moments that were special to him was really cool. Oh, and going through, especially like the last 10 years of his career as this was written, um, he's one of the absolute busiest musicians ever. He's in the two bands, then he's got his own band, the trio, then he's got his solo work, and he's just bouncing from one thing to another with seemingly very little time off in between. Just like, wow. I don't know if, as much as I loved playing live and touring us, I don't know if I could handle that now.
Yeah, and he also mentioned playing with Jimi Hendrix. Like
Yeah, that
you were
was
surprised by that too, right?
crazy. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was nuts. How many even legendary guitar players can say they did that?
right.
And
Okay,
he was
so
reluctant, right? And Jimmy signaled him to come on stage.
yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's in like the fourth chapter of the book or something, or
yeah.
somewhere around there. And I quite like how the chapter titles are named after songs and maybe lyrics in some places. I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So there are photos from like his youth and early bands and later bands, and the Muppets thing. He was invited to watch a filming of the Muppets in 1980. So
Oh,
there's a
wow.
picture of him with the newsman.
Ha. Funny.
Yeah.
Something.
So, oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, slug bug. Annie Haslam, when we interviewed her, and I love that he called her up in his book so many times, but she told us one of the things she said about him was what a gentleman he was and everything. And I really, really got an overwhelming sense of that listening
Mhm.
to the audio version of the book, that he really was. And that's also the side of him, I believe, that made him so meticulous and fastidious about things, and so by the book and strict when it came to performing, and all those things I think are folded into that man that she was referring to, just like the ultimate consummate professional musician.
Yeah. And was there anything in the book that surprised you that we haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, his early drug use. To tell you the truth, when he was so open about in the really early days, and I forgot what band he was in. It might have been Bodas or Tomorrow, or even before those, that he mentioned the heavy drinking and then all the hash, and then I'm like, Steve Howe, like it was just so. But then when things started to flip for him and continued and has throughout his life in 1972, when him and Jan became vegetarians, and they got into microbiotic, which I knew about years and years ago. But then even still today, the things he talks about that he studies in regard to Taoism, Zen, meditation, all these different things that affect your mind, your physical body, and your spiritual, your soul, all that stuff I really loved. And there were some things that were a little bit surprising from the earlier days, because I know him more as the now persona versus they get so
Yeah,
ripped that they
like
barely.
the straight-laced, proper
Yeah.
behavior persona.
Yeah. How about you? What kind of surprise? There must have been some.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that, even just his first solo album, Beginnings, that there wasn't as much coverage, like in-depth coverage of that or of the making of certain songs. And it kind of similar to how I felt reading Steve Hackett's book. I really enjoyed that book as well, but it was kind of surprising how he didn't delve into his solo career, the making of certain things all that much. But so with all my yesterdays, I kind of had to remind myself that okay, this is a career and of decades long career, and it's a lot to summarize in a book. So I think just taking that into account, the medium, like it still does its
Yeah.
job of encapsulating the career. And
Yeah.
Steve Howe and Steve Hackett, they each have their things that they'd like to talk about, and if they feel like they've put down what they want to say in the way that they want to say it, then that's respectable.
Yeah. I had forgotten about this, but was surprised at first that he doesn't even play on Relayer. That was like, I completely forgot about that.
Wait, what?
Oh, what? Oh, this isn't April Fool's Day anymore.
Yeah, no, but you reminded me. It was I don't want to dwell on this too much, but in the book when he says because he was writing this in the 2010s, and he was like, we're hoping to perform Sound Chaser and To Be Over again in the future, and just having the hindsight of the changed plans. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was like a big oof moment reading that
Yeah.
part. But
Prophetic, maybe.
but I do like the detail he goes into, even with ABWH and symphonic music of Yes.
Yeah,
And
that was it. Oh, that was surprising when he said that no one was happy with the cover of Magnification. That really took me aback. Like, for it to not be Roger Dean is okay. There's been other ones that weren't Roger Dean, But I thought for it to not be Roger Dean, that was a great cover. And he said no, but
Yeah.
at John Anderson's insistence, it wasn't going to be, and they got that, and no one was happy with it. That surprised me because I love that cover.
Yeah, I think the magnification cover fits with the, you know, hearing the title of that album and seeing that cover, it just somehow makes sense to me, you know?
Yeah. A couple other quick things. When he mentioned that the DVD that they filmed in Amsterdam, he thinks is possibly the best DVD, the best Yes film. And I had to really
Yeah.
think about that. Like, I love that, but I think what makes Songs from Songas better for me is the fact that there's a keyboard member in the band. No offense to our friend Tom Brislin at all. It's a wonderful performance by everybody. It's a wonderful DVD. Hearing the stories of the different orchestras and how some worked better than others and all of that. But Songs from Songas being the five of them that are all members, for me, it was just one step above. Cinematographically, I do think maybe Symphonic is better. That there's some that's
Yeah.
wonderfully filmed and edited.
Yeah, at some point we do need to cover those 21st century films
Yeah,
still, but
we
yeah,
won't only done the old ones.
Songs from Songas is um my favorite as well, but I think Symphonic Live is also a favorite of John Anderson, if I remember
Oh,
correctly.
interesting.
Like he's talked about revisiting like watching that again in recent years. Um
And why
so
doesn't that have a Roger Dean cover? Why does it have the crop circles and stuff? I never understood that.
Yeah, I think that that theme fits very well with you know, flowing from the magnification cover, you know,
Okay,
on the back
like
of
the
it.
other side of the story,
Yeah, you know,
whichever
you
one.
got this planet and like the John Anderson symbol thing, this device or
Yeah.
whatever it is. I think it fits well with that theme.
Okay. Cool.
Um, but yeah, and Steve does talk a bit about family, you know, whatever he's comfortable with. I'm sure, like, you know, he mentions that they all miss Virgil, and it's understandable that there wouldn't be too much time spent because it's like tough to talk about. But I
Oh,
do like that he talks about the family at least.
yeah. And I was surprised that he mentioned it up front. And then he didn't mention it later in the chronology of when it happened. But I did like that he spent the time talking about the album Nexus that they did together and
Yeah,
is our anthology.
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, so this was a really good read, you know,
Absolutely. Good,
with
great
these
listen too.
yeah, you know, with these autobiographies we've talked about, you get different things. Um, like in Phil Collins's book, Not Dead Yet, you learn a bit about some of the stuff he went through, and
Goodness,
um,
yes.
yeah, and what's funny is with like the familiar events, I get so tuned in to like, you know, the big events in the careers of these bands and these musicians. So like with Phil Collins's book, for example, when they're trying to figure out what singer should replace Peter Gabriel, it's like we as the audience know what's going to happen, but it's like, okay, how long is it going to take for them to figure out when you're like reading this
And
thing,
what
you
are
know?
the steps? Yeah. There was a few things I think what you're saying also in Steve Howe's book, All My Yesterdays,
Yeah.
there were a few things like that, like when Rick left and they got Patrick, and then Patrick sort of went to outer space and they got Rick back, and then with Igor, and then with Jeff, and with it just back and forth, and Oliver, and that was like a constant thread because that's part of Yes, you know. So like you say, we know the outcome, but hearing and reading the behind the scenes elements of how each thing fell apart or came back together was quite interesting. I liked that.
Yeah, he very much acknowledges that Yes has had such a complex evolution with all the people coming in and out of the
Yeah.
band. Um, so it really does its job of adding and like shedding light on some of the mythology of the band, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. It might be the most thorough account of it so far.
Oh, you really think so?
I do, because there's a lot of stuff in it I haven't heard in interviews. There's a lot of stuff I've never read in magazines from back in the day, like Cream, Hit Parade, that kind of stuff. And And like you said earlier, we see the other side of some of the other stories by some of the other people involved. There's just so much more depth to it all that, yeah, I do think this might be the richest account of all the behind the scenes stuff of how things came together from one album and tour to the next, with not just Yes, but with Asia as well.
Yeah.
I never realized he was so busy with the Steve Howe trio and that him and Dylan did so much work together.
Yeah, and I think between both Steves, you also get a good overview of the GTR situation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. We highly recommend, folks. We give it 10 stars out of 5. It was really, truly a gem. It was great.
Yeah. And before I forget, I want to give a shout out to something I saw earlier. There's this video up on YouTube called Steve Howe Knows I Have His Old Guitar. And it's basically a phone call that this person who bought Steve Howe's guitar from someone had with him. So, and the guitar looks really nice. It's a really cool looking Les Paul. Apparently Steve would like put an invisible signature on the back of it, and it's a really cool conversation. And it even mentions the Tormato story book by our friend Kevin from Yes Music Podcast.
So, and where is this?
This is up on YouTube. It's called
Steve. Send me that. I'd love to check that out.
All right.
Or pop it into the comments as well. All right, saying what it is. Since you brought it up, you might as well share with the rest of the class. Okay, right. So I have to ask this question since it's Steve Howe's birthday, and this is for all of you watching, whether you're watching live or on the archive, whether you're watching on Yes Shift or Drum Talk TV. What is your favorite work by Steve Howe? It could be a song, it could be a specific passage or solo, it could be an entire album, it could be an entire era. But if you had to pick any one of those choices to express a favorite, starting with my son Steven, what would it be? And you can't say all of Yes, like the whole time in Yes, like that's a little too broad.
So it can't be all the yesterdays. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably no surprise, but I would say Tales from Topographic Oceans. You know, it's my favorite Yes album, and it's got some really great guitar work on there and some great lyrics. Like, I don't know, I can't really think of anything else that tops that for me, as great as his discography is. What about you?
That I have to agree. I wasn't sure I was settled on something when I asked the question, but as soon as you answered, you know, that is my favorite album.
Oh, so you're gonna steal my answer.
What's that? What?
I said you're gonna steal my answer.
No, but it's the same. It is my favorite all-time album, and you know, I would love. This is so selfish. I don't care to hear anyone else's remix of that, but I would love to personally remix it because I hear in my head how to modernize it without losing what's there. Like I mentioned about the Tomorrow album, because it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to take everything and just make it brighter and bigger and fatter and deeper. And that's not always what something needs, you know, and there's so many little subtleties. Like a Monty Python film, there's so many subtleties in that album that 50 years later, whatever, I listen to it and I go, oh my gosh, I never noticed that little string pull off right there. Or, you know, I love stuff like that. And I think some of that would shine through with a slightly different mix. I say slightly because I wouldn't plan on ruining it by making it my own. But just enhance certain enhancements and with what sonically is possible today, that's an album that's worthy of that. And even if you listen to that and then the sonic properties of Relayer, they are quite different. Relayer does make Tales sound a bit like pushed down a bit, if you will, or squashed to a degree, with the same analogy of the way drama is to Tormato, Relayer is to Tales sonically, but the music on Tales prevails. That should be a book. Like it rises way above that, because back then that's all there was anyway. You know, it sounded as it sounded. Now there's so many things to compare it to, which might not be fair, but it opens our ears and eyes to the possibilities of what could be done with it. And I'm just, like I said, I'm selfishly saying, I'm just afraid someone else would go overboard and do too much. Whereas I have a very clear sonic vision in my head of what I would do to it. That's just me. It sounds like a fun project. So
Yeah, I
I'd
know
love to get
that.
duplicates of the multi-tracks, Mr. Howe.
Yeah, I know that Steven Wilson has done a remix of Tales, but I'm not sure that I've ever listened to it.
See, I'm totally unaware. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Um,
I'd be willing to listen to it. Maybe that's a show. Compare and do some side-by-side snippets. Oh, we can't do that. It'll get muted. What an idiot. But um, I, I would love to cite side-by-side snippets without playing them and get other people involved, fans to chime in on that. There's a couple more comments, I think. Let me take a peek. Oh, that's you. I just think the music is, it's like if you had an amazing performance by the London Philharmonic doing Brahms, and it was from 1960, it'd be an amazing challenge to get the 2024 London Philharmonic to do the same performance as good, but with modern recording technology and pressing and all that. That's the way I'm looking at it.
yeah.
It's not that it sucks. I would just love to hear what could be done. So I want to hear the Steve Wilson mix now, because I know that album inside and out, like almost every Yes album, except a couple of the real early ones. I know every note, can play every note on most of the instruments, not nearly as well, but the drums I have down. I've been playing it since it came out, basically. Yeah. So I'd love to hear, my point is, I'm not bragging that. My point is I'd be able to hear the differences with the Steve Wilson mix in every little nuance because I know it so well. That's all.
Yeah. And you've also reminded me that Kevin, I think we might have mentioned this before, he's working on a book called the Tales from Topographic Ocean's Listening Guide. So
oh yeah, he did mention that.
Yeah, so that'll be an interesting read as well, sure.
For sure. And I remembered something else from all my yesterdays when he started talking about all the Asia stuff. It actually inspired me to go downstairs into my studio and play to some Asia music. Like it got me juiced up. Yeah, it really did. It was very inspirational hearing how it all came together and how they developed the songs and the sounds and I said, I want to go play some of that. And I played a few things off the first album.
Yeah, we do get some good Asia coverage in this book.
Yeah.
Again, like this does a great job showing the different aspects of his career.
Yeah. Great job. Awesome. Thanks, folks, for following what we do and for joining Stephen and I on our review of All My Yesterdays by Steve Howe, his autobiography. It's available pretty much everywhere. If you want the audio version, I got it on Audible. It's such a great listen. It's great. And I typically prefer to listen to books rather than read them for two reasons. One, it's hard for me to find time to read books. And two, it's hard for me to find time to read books. But the books that I do read, as opposed to listen to, are more like educational, instructional books. I can highlight them and stuff like that. So if you're like me and you like to listen, this is a great one.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So yeah, I'm sure there's probably some other anecdotes that will come back to mind and be like, oh yeah, we didn't mention that. But that just shows how rich this book is. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's tough to like say every little thing that's like in it, but there's a lot about it that's worth reading.
Cool. Thanks, folks. You can follow us at youtube.com/@YesShift. You can follow us at facebook.com/YesShift. You can go to anchor.fm/YesShift, and you can write to us at yesshiftpodcast@gmail.com. Give us suggestions, comments, and on Drum Talk TV, where we simulcast.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks.